to Soul Therapy Anointed Radio. I'm your host, Harry Coast, and you'll be with me in this hour as we journey through soul therapy together.
My mind is a racing car, I know it'll crash. My heart is a sinking ship waiting to splash. Therapy, you're my remedy. Let me break what I ache into pieces. Oh, therapy, you're my remedy. When it feels oh so real, you're my lifeline. Oh, therapy, you're my remedy. Won't you give me peace of mind?
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Soul Therapy, a program on the Luke 418 radio station, the leading cutting edge of Christian radio worldwide on the internet. And I'm your host, Carrie Coast. I'm with you on your journey to bless your path and point you to Jesus. He is everything. So I am going to introduce you to our guest who has been on the show before. And we are going to talk about how we change. Do you ever want to change or wish somebody else would change? Of course. So let's take a look at what change is all about. So I want to give a warm welcome to my esteemed colleague, Takohi. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being back.
Yes, me too. Well, shall we jump into this topic? I understand that you're actually writing a book on this topic.
Yes, I am writing a book on it, and the book itself is causing quite a few changes.
Right?
Absolutely.
It takes a lot to have a book evolve into something that's anywhere close to what you think it will be, and it's a surprising thing, isn't it? Is along the way, you've learned a lot.
Insights.
New insights.
New insights, for sure.
Yeah. There are some things about change. It can be generalized. What do you think when you think about people and how we change?
There are a couple of things, and I'm going to leave out how you come to the conclusion that a change is necessary or desired, because that has to come first. There's two basic types of change. And one is the change that follows a certain amount of steps, such as, gathering information about what it is you're going to need to do to change, getting in that process of changing, and moving forward until the desired behavior is present. The other one that follows the same steps, but in a different way, is what I call a transformational event.
An event. And the other one that you said talked about something more procedural, a process,
Yes, it's a process.
Change following certain steps toward what you want, and then an event itself.
Right, absolutely. So most of the time, we're going to be doing the steps of a change, the procedure. So we're going to gather some information about ourselves, since that is the only person whose change we need to see after. We're going to, after we gather the information, we need to look at, when this is going to start, what it's going to look like, what's the support that we're going to get to help us do the change. And after we get all this set up, then we're going to look at, well, is this an adjustment I'm making? Is it a change, or is it a transformation that's needed? And it depends on what you're attempting to change. So if you simply, want to change, I'll think of something small, let's say you want to change your route to work for some particular reason, whether it's temporary or permanent. You want to change your route to work. It's very important that you do that to you. And you go, okay, this is what I'm going to do now. So maybe, the first 2 or 3 times it's fairly simple because you're totally focused on it. And then one day you get out and get in the car and you go into automatic pilot. You go the other way to work. It's not a wrong way, but it's the other way, the one you no longer wanted to take. And that's what most change looks like. There's a process to it. And there's also a point when you do the thing that your desire is not to do anymore, and you will. And that's part of it. And that should be understood that that's going to happen. Therefore, when that happens, there is no judgment required, and judgment is not necessary because the old behavior has information in it for you. And as long as you glean that information, then you just move forward.
So new information is also a part of it. And you were talking about process change or procedural versus an event that happens that changes us. The easy picture that I get from that is we might decide we want to, say, stop biting our nails. That's one that would be procedural. Then there might be an event that transforms us, something like
absolutely
moving to another state where all the environment is different. Is that what you mean by transformational event?
Those are outer changes. And so, no, a transformational event is, I'll give you an example, and it's an extreme example. And so in the book, when I'm right, I am not addressing this level, this type of change. I'll just say that first. But since I have worked with it and seen it up close, I will refer to it. I worked in substance recovery. And so people will come in recognizing that they have an addiction or they have a dependence and want to change that. So they no longer want to use whatever the substance is, alcohol, drugs, any longer. And they come in and they begin a process, okay? And you continue that process until the result is you no longer use the substance. Part of the process is though the mental and physiological participation so that you don't, what do you do when you have a craving? What do you do when a situation where you only know how to handle it through using comes up? What do you do then? And those are the things you learn in that process. A transformational change is what happens when someone doesn't want to use anymore and suddenly something within them happens. And
okay, so for example, my father smoked cigarettes until he was 43 and he looked at one, snuffed it out, and never smoked another.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about something like that, something on the inside that made the person make a very strong decision to do something, turn their life in a different direction.
Absolutely. And then some of that process is simply turned into an instantaneous thing. So you have now all of a sudden the desire, you have focus, motivation, and a changed behavior. Boom, there it is.
Okay. Process and motivation and a changed behavior.
Mm-hmm. Because the changed behavior in a process is the end of the road. And what you do after that is maintaining that changed behavior.
So it becomes maintenance.
Yes.
So we learn about something in the course of becoming our mental health clinicians. And one of those is a model called Prochaska. This is a person who talked about that. That first we have to do pre-contemplation where we're thinking about change. We're not actually doing it, just sort of like, what would it be like to have a different car or live somewhere different? What would it be like if I didn't, let's borrow from my example earlier, if I didn't smoke cigarettes? And then there's contemplation where we're really thinking about it, like, okay, what would be the actual ways? Or what would be the actual car that I want? Or what would be the actual place I would live? And then we might make an actual decision more firmly that we're going to do this change, and that sets it in motion. And then from there, we go through the process of making the change, and we have to maintain that change and keep it in place. And with many things like addiction, which you brought up, I'm sure that a lot of listeners would hear that word and think, oh, how nice that would be if this person didn't have the addiction, or if I didn't have that part of my life that I don't like. So something like that. Is that where this fits in?
In a way. And for, the sake of what we're talking about, the example that I use, we'll do that. Because Prochaska is used, in the recovery process.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other things people want to change. They want to change anger issues, how they react during traffic. People sometimes want to change how they react to certain words or phrases.
That's a good point.
Things,
triggers.
Right.
Not be triggered. That's a big one.
Right. And in order to do any of these changes, what I have is, the way I look at it is that there's a spectrum. And so you need to find out where on the spectrum your change is. So is it an adjustment? Is it an actual change? With change, you have minor change, kind of a moderate change. You're like, ooh, this is a big change. So this is like a maximum change. Or now you're on the border of transformation. And along with that, you also are able to look at the length of time you are going to be possibly involved in the process.
Okay.
So when you begin,
so on that last one, what are you thinking about? Someone who might think, how long will this take? What would be an example of that? Maybe weight loss.
You need to understand what you're doing, what is at stake, what's your desired behavior / results, and you need to plan. So it's basically counting the cost.
Counting the cost. I think it's also, there's a big part of it in just identifying that this is possible and making it a goal, letting the desire come up.
Yes, which doesn't always happen in that, in the same way when it's a transformational change. So when you get to the desired result, sometimes it's a matter of types of relationships people get in, toxic, dysfunctional, etc. relationships. And, by the time you're on your third or fourth relationship like that, I think you might want to look in the mirror instead of looking out at other people.
Right.
Because the common denominator is you.
Right.
So what do you need to do to not attract those same types of people? What do you need to do to not feel an attraction towards that same type of person?
What is the root of it?
Absolutely. And that has to be taken care of. And so how long will this take? So in order to know how long it will take, you have to know, what are you going to be doing? What is your support in this? Are you talking to a therapist? Are you going to some classes? Are you listening to some TED Talks from YouTube? What is it you're doing to support your journey?
Mm-hmm. So how do you make sure that you do everything you can toward it?
Well, your own impetus. How badly do you really want this changed?
Mm-hmm.
And then you set up some people. And when you do that, whether it's a like a relationship coach, whether it's a therapist, and all of these other things. You really need to have one person that you have as a support that does not have any stake in your change.
There's a scripture, Amos 3:3, that says, "How can two walk together unless they've agreed on the direction?" And this is when we have a goal, in this case of what we're talking about with how an individual person could change. When we have a goal, two are better than one is another scripture. And with having somebody that's a support person and they're agreeing on your direction and helping you walk there, helping you get to that place of change, whatever it is, and we've listed several kinds, that's one place where we are looking right now, that how we can have a support person, a key person that would keep us going.
Absolutely. And they cannot have a stake in it. So no, if it's, certain things, it can't be a relative. It can't be sometimes your best friend, especially when it comes to things like relationships, because they're all impacted by every bad relationship you've had. And so, no, it can't be them.
That's
it can't
true.
Be
That's true.
Someone who's going to benefit or someone who's going to lose if you don't do it, or benefit if you do.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be someone outside of your circle.
Someone not vested in it, but neutral.
Absolutely.
Who wouldn't take it personally,
right,
but does care.
Oh, absolutely. They care very much. They're going to, want to know what your goals are. They're going to talk about those goals with you. What do you want me to do? It needs to be very clear what their part is, and you need to tell them, okay, here's what I want you to do.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So there's a lot to this, and the preparation piece, when somebody begins to put a change in place, when they've decided to do that. So this is one of those steps that happens naturally. I know, particularly with addiction, when we deal with that behavior, whether it's our own or someone else, it can be so frustrating. There's always a fantasy that this can happen easily, but it didn't get there very easily, so it doesn't happen very easily. And often we think that we just proceed through and everything will be fine and we'll all live happily ever after. But the truth is, with something like addiction and a lot of kinds of compulsions, there is a falling off the wagon. And it can be very frustrating for the loved ones who maybe they've done this again and again, and maybe they've done everything that they can. Maybe they believe they have, but there's something else they can do. That's a difficult part of this as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's part of the reason, I don't address addiction at all, in the book, because that takes you somewhere with a lot of pain and anguish about the family and all those kinds of things. So that's why I didn't even go in that direction.
It's a very large scale, and I think that's an important point that you're bringing up about taking what we can. I know one thing that I've learned about change, and that is we have to make it small, and get a success from the tiny part in order to have transformation begin.
Process. Yeah, that's part of the process as you go along.
Is to break it down.
Right, but it's also charted. I mean, the person doing the change has a chart. They're not just kind of pulling this out of their mind every morning. Oh, now what? This is all charted. Okay. Including the fact that there will be a setback. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a setback.
A setback, or in the addiction realm, relapse, but they're the same.
That's why I don't use addiction in the book, because you can't have the same attitude about a relapse that you can a setback.
That's right.
It's not the same thing.
A setback can be a smaller thing, and if we can think of it as a minor setback, and not feel that it's a failure. And that's one of the problems
there's
with a
no
relapse.
Yeah, there's no minor or major setback. It's just a setback. And there are three things you get from a setback. See, the setback is another aspect. Number one, it shows you there was a gap or loophole in your plan. That's what it tells you. You did not account for everything. So thank goodness, due to the setback, now you know where the gap was. Where did where did this thing that happened that I did or didn't do, depending upon what it is, where was this in my plan? Oh, look, I didn't account for this in my plan.
Yeah.
Now I need to. What you call the feedback from the setback.
Very good.
You
So
get your feedback.
the feedback, to look at it, what we can do differently now, rather than to say this is never going to work. It failed. I give up. But to say, okay, we're anticipating these things will happen. And that's a very important part of making any change. So we can find the very attainable thing and work toward that. And then when something is a snafu, and I'm sure there's a better way of saying it than that, but any kind of a lapse, we look at, why did that one happen? And I'm glad that you brought up earlier about triggers, because triggers are everywhere and we don't expect them. We, for example, don't know that we hear an ad for Cheerios cereal and suddenly we're crying because we're remembering that our grandparent who passed away always ate Cheerios or something like that. And it may seem like a silly thing, but those little moments that affect our senses bring all that around, right? Something that we've seen, something that we've heard. Music is a powerful one, and so our scents. The smell of something, the smell of a turkey cooking, for example, for Americans is going to be, Thanksgiving. And what happens on Thanksgiving in that person's life. So these triggers that we deal with that are part of it, that you're talking about, where do we go with those?
Well, first, if you're, in the example, Cheerios and your grandmother and crying. Now, these are happy tears of nostalgia. That's not a trigger. Okay.
Well, they might be. They might be triggers of something bad. They might be
that's
still
what I'm saying with the
suffering
example,
in the grief.
Well, I just wanted to be really clear about
really
something.
clear. Okay.
Okay. Number one, triggers are due to unprocessed pain.
Correct.
Okay. So if that is still there, if that pain is still there, then that's what needs to be attended to, because it is not the memory or the thing that basically does a little emotional earthquake that then, gets to all of those painful memories. That hasn't been dealt with. That just is something you take into your therapist, you take to your daily meditation and prayer, you take that there and your therapist to get that dealt with, to get that removed, to get whatever has been covered to be uncovered. Because people walk around with these parts of pain in them all the time, and when somebody runs, accidentally bumps into their bruised part, people get angry and they say, hey, that triggers me. Well, your triggers are your issue. They do. No one needs to walk around you gingerly because you have triggers.
Right.
Because that person is busy.
It's a dance.
Watching out for their own triggers.
Right. It's a dance. So each person has their own for different reasons.
Right. And I don't want to hear about your triggers this year and still hear about them next year. What are you doing with it?
Okay.
Are you just setting up some roadblocks so no one bumps into your triggers? Okay, but then are you going somewhere and talking about it and getting it done and going through whatever, using any clinical modality that can help relieve that? Because, next year, that shouldn't be there.
Well, I hear what you're saying, that I know that these things can take our lifetime and we may not even accomplish them. I think of Paul, who said, "Wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death? I do what I don't want to do. I don't do what I do want to do." And for me, another portion of it, if these two things can marry a little bit, we do have to have some grace, a lot of grace with ourselves, and that dance of trying to get a balance of the compassion and the boundary.
It's not going to be a lack of compassion, but it is a lack of not taking responsibility for things and not looking to see there are a lot of things you can't control, but there are some things you can get a good handle on.
Yeah, ideally.
And
so we work toward them, right?
Right. And so people, do a lot of, let's shove everything in the group that, things I can't change. Well, let's not. Let's really go through the pile. It's kind of like emotional hoarder. And let's really go through it and carefully look at everything. Can something be done about this? Okay, you know what? This is a possibility. Let's move this over here. All right, for now, we're going to leave the rest of that. We're going to work on this. And so things can be improved and things can be decreased. And, bad reactions can be lessened and the pain, some of the pain can be alleviated. So it does not need to be everything that hurts in the same capacity all the time, all through the life.
It does not need to be everything all in one basket. And it does happen that way. And, for the listeners, I want to say I don't want you to feel that you have to become perfect, because that is by no means what we're saying here. What we're talking about is, I believe what I'm hearing rising up is where a piece of responsibility meets a piece of reality, the reality that being a human being means that we're going to have these sensitivities. And we don't even always understand them. We don't even always see them. We may not even see them when we have repeated bitter fights. And it's a very broad thing to say, because both you and I have been clinicians in many settings and seen so many kinds of what I'm talking about, where you have bitterness between people, where a person has bitterness in themselves. And that's only just one slice. That's not even a full description. And I wonder what your thoughts are on the verse from Romans that we transform ourselves by renewing of the mind, and through meditating on the Bible is where we come from on Luke 4:18. What are your thoughts on that?
Renewing of the mind is I'm just thinking that this is all, I would say 90% of the renewal needs to be of your mind. It has to do with how you think of things, which is how they affect you. You think of something in a certain way, your emotions respond to that thought. So if you change the way you think of it, your emotions respond to that. So renewing of the mind is very important. That's basically renewal and transformation, right there, synonymous. And that renewal is what you're after. When we talk about reframing, or the more common way is, is the glass half full or the glass half empty? That makes an impact on your life, how you view things. Is everything to you a glass half empty? And it does matter. Notice, we know this, but in the describing of this, you are talking about the same glass. The water level has not changed. Glass half full is the same glass as the glass half empty for someone else.
So then that makes me think of something else. So in the glass half empty, the glass half full scenario, I think about how much hope someone has, how much expectation they have.
Mm-hmm.
And the words I used earlier about grace really fit into that. The more hope we have, the more grace we tend to give to others. We see a broader picture. We see light, and light extinguishes darkness, right? So,
Absolutely cannot coexist.
right, they can't coexist. They can't. So having that hope, and so where do you see that fitting in to the change model and your thoughts on change and what you've witnessed in your 29 years of your life? You didn't have to laugh at that. Now the audience knows you're more than 29.
Yeah, I'm 30, but it was kind of funny.
Yeah, we remember 29.
Yeah, exactly. You know, hope. You must have hope for there to be change. Okay, and as a clinician, what you can do, there are always clients who don't have hope. Okay, and the fact that they don't have hope, we come in with everything. Okay, we're born and we have it all. We are a complete, marvelous spiritual package, and we have hope. Somewhere in the process, that process of growing up, and all the different events and situations and all of that, hope can wane. And so then you end up somewhere without it. And what you can do is you can just inform people, just first identify for them if they need it. Sometimes they know they don't have hope, and they will tell you, I just don't really feel any hope about this or any hope about that, or in general for life. You having hope as a clinician, who better knows change is possible? Who else knows how to help initiate change? If there is someone who doesn't believe people can change, they dare not be a therapist or a clergy. So
That's true.
we know there's hope. Sit in your hope for your client, for your parishioner, for whoever it is. Hold that hope for them and tell them that's what you're doing. I believe this. I believe for you. I can see it even though you can't. So I'm going to carry this hope, and I'm going to have this hope for you until you're able to have it for yourself.
The encouragement, the aspect of it is of encouraging, being able to see something that person can't see. And I think it's kind of fun that God is called a wonderful counselor.
Yes.
Amen.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
And described in a few places in the Bible as being one that doesn't change. And that doesn't mean rigid and unwilling. There's no rebellion in God. It's that the perfection and the consistency meet perfectly. And and we, as mere mortals, we just keep striving for that. Paul called it the good race, and trying to get the prize. Persevering really is what he was saying. So another element of the change is the persevering, and then there's, in addition, the accepting where we are, not saying we have to stay there, because what we're trying to do, as you said, is take on some responsibility for it. And I love how Ephesians 4 says to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds and put on the new self after the likeness of God. And we can't just snap our fingers and get there.
No.
But
when
we're on that journey, right? And
yes, and when you arrive, in your newness. When you get there, you will know it. Then, when you know it, you speak accordingly, you act accordingly. A change in attitude is evidenced by a change in behavior.
Yeah.
You cannot have a new attitude and the same old behavior.
And I think that's why Paul talked, many places in the Bible, but I think of scripture, Paul said, of a circumcision of the heart. It's not until we decide something a little bit differently that everything turns around. You started with an example of take a different route to work. And it's kind of funny that you say that, because I've actually done that. I've decided, you know what? I think I would be a better driver and be a more relaxed person if I take this more scenic route. Takes a little longer, takes some preparation steps. And it was a literally change in my mind about which way to go. And getting to the job that I had at that time, not only was I better for the day, but more importantly, those moments were better. And I still can picture it. It was a very beautiful scenic drive, the long way to get there. And a small change like that can be very hard, especially I know a lot of the listeners, you've got very busy lives, even if you don't leave your home. Very busy on the inside of that home, right? And we don't think of it that way. And a lot of people err in thinking that someone in the house is just, staring at a wall all day. And that's not the case. So this is really good stuff to look at that are pieces of change. We'd like to be.
I've done that too.
You have too? So that was not, that was a realistic one.
I've changed my route to work. I wasn't thinking about myself, but when you said, I've done that, and I'm laughing to myself going, yeah, so have I.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't I got there a little bit earlier, and it wasn't that. It wasn't early. It was about it being scenic, but also about one route where I was paying and one route that was free. And I just decided I am not going to do this other route that was, so congested because
very
of the
costly.
way I felt inside.
In time, in stress on yourself.
Right, exactly. That's where the cost was within me. Okay. So when I did the other one, and I had my radio on and I was just enjoying it and just driving and peaceful. And I just thought, yes. And only because I didn't insist on living in an attitude of lack that I said, no, I'm just going to do this other way. It wasn't the time. It was the quality of the drive.
The quality of the drive. And we can get very caught up in what we must do and become patterned in certain ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because consistency is also good. But sometimes there is this little degree of self-care and self-respect, self-reward that can come from giving ourselves time. And we need to do that. That is a big gift. And
yes, and that's true. And consistency, though, is not the same thing as being in a rut.
It's not the same thing as being rigid and being unable to have a flexible mind. So, this has been a wonderful talk. I really appreciate it, Takohi. Do you have any other thoughts on this topic? Last thoughts?
Well, before change begins, you have to come face to face with what your expectations are that your change will bring about. And that's extremely important, no matter what it is doing, no matter whether it is addressing, inappropriate anger. It doesn't matter if it's addressing whether or not you think that you should, eat better, have better relationships, whatever it is. And one of the things I thought of when you talked about relapse with, addiction is that a larger group that has a far greater recidivism rate than those who have addictions are those who have diabetes. And so, you can see that it isn't just the substances, the alcohol or the drugs, but it is other things that cause, a non-productive behavior and results. So people do well, and then they go, oh, hey, I can do this or this or this instead. And then they kind of, go off and don't get back on the road for a while. But they can get back on because they know where it is. As long as you know where it is, you can go back there.
As long as you know where it is, you can return.
Yeah.
So we don't lose hope.
Yes. No, you get back on the road, get back on track, just wherever you are. It's not a matter of, oh my goodness, depending upon where you are, do I have to start all over? Well, you start where you are. What can you get in alignment now? Okay, let's try that this week. We'll do some other things next week. This week, we're going to get this in alignment. So, for instance, we're going to drink a lot more water this week, but next week we're going to, incorporate, more, green leafy vegetables this week, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. Let's do the things that we add, and then let's take away later after we've added some things. Because, the mental attitude of being deprived is hugely responsible for recidivism, with a diet that will support better health for people who are diabetics.
Very good. Recidivism, for those who don't know that word, it just means falling back to the old ways. It's usually spoken of in the context of people who've been put in jail for committing a crime, and rates of recidivism, how much do they end up back in jail. But it's also a process of change for us in everything in the legal setting, in the what is legal setting. So thank you for all of that. I want to tie all of this back to a few scriptures that have come to mind while you've been speaking to Kohei. I know you know your scriptures.
I'd love to hear them.
Okay, I'm going to say this. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, whatever them is for you. We'll use that. For it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave or forsake you. That should be good encouragement for all believers. And in addition to that, from Revelation 21, verse 5, and he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also, he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. God is making things new, and he's staying the same. And this is what he is doing in us. So when we are desiring to make a change that's for the good, we should know that God is with us, and we're lining ourselves up with what is good from him. And Romans, that I said before, I'll repeat, Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, we will add, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed, and this was the part I said earlier, by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And the last one that I want to read is Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. And I love in that, a time to pluck up what is planted. Sometimes what is planted is something in our hearts, in our minds, in our will that we don't want to keep having there.
Right, absolutely.
All
Lots
these
of things that are, as a child, you don't want to keep those as an adult.
Yes. So we have that time to heal and a time to do things together and a time to do things apart, various kinds of change. And so thank you for letting us look at that together, Takohi. Did you have any last thought on this?
I absolutely have nothing to come behind that last wonderful scripture.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
Yeah, there's a reason that one is so well known. So thank you for that, and I really appreciate having you again as my guest. Look forward to another time when we can chew up some scripture and chew up some realities of how they get applied. And so I want to leave with the blessing that I do at the end of every episode, and that is for you and I both, as well as all the listeners and everybody who's a part of the Luke 418 radio station and church. That is this, that is, may the Lord bless and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. So we both say to all the listeners, thank you, and blessings and shalom to you until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Be sure to share the podcast on your favorite social media channel.